Hi, I'm Naledi Radebe. I'm 29 years old and I've been tested positive for coronavirus COVID-19. I think I was aware of the situation, but when you hear something that's like it just seems so arbitrary. It was like there's this flu that's like moving around in Asia, in China, and it's killing old people. And on this side, I think there were a lot of memes being made, and there was a lot of, oh, it's not going to affect Africans. So the conversation didn't seem particularly serious for us on this side. And I think I also had an attitude of, well, I mean, it's a flu, I'm young. So when I went to the UK, I had already pre-planned my trip, and it wasn't the only place I was meant to go. I was meant to do the whole of Europe. So you can't specifically pinpoint an incident where you're like, okay, this is where it happened, because you have so many interactions, you're touching so many surfaces. But what I do think is I got a phone call from a friend of mine, and we'd been together, and she asked me if I'd had any symptoms. And this was when I was in South Africa, because she just received a phone call from a friend of hers who she'd hugged just before seeing me. And they'd hugged, had a chat, had a full conversation, and hadn't seen each other in a while. And it was kind of like a long embrace. And I suspect that was the point of contraction. And 6 days later, I started showing symptoms from. And so I went to sleep wearing a surgical mask for fear that my cousin, who was sleeping next to me, was going to actually make me sick, because I thought that she looked like she was stifling coughs through the day, to be fair. So I fell asleep with my surgical mask. But when I woke up, my chest was so tight. It was as if it felt like if somebody was sitting on it and then telling me to breathe. Immediately I wake up, I feel like I can't breathe. I tell my cousin, and fortunately for me, I think she took me quite seriously, because it was just unusual for me to say something like it. I think the day before I'd really just been like, guys, I think I've got it. Oh my God. And, we're all kind of going back and forth. We're saying, oh, I've got it. We're making each other panic. We called the NHS, which is the National Health System in the UK. We were put on hold they said it was going to be over an hour. And they almost explicitly made it clear during the waiting period that if you were calling, it was because you were in a very dire situation. And if your situation escalated to the point of near death, you were to call a number called 999 and for an ambulance. So I'm sitting there and I'm looking at my cousin and I'm like, okay, what, we're going to wait an hour? Are we even going to get through? We're trying to discuss throwing back ideas at each other. I'm saying she's asking me symptom per symptom. She's like, are you suffering from a fever right now? I'm saying, no. Shortness of breath. She said, hold your breath for 15 seconds. I hold my breath for 15 seconds. She's like, you are showing no symptoms. Like, this is going to be so hard to explain to anybody. It's difficult to explain to me. So I said, okay, fine. Let me call my mom. So my mom's feedback was that there was nothing that was going to be able to be done in the UK. I was a South African citizen. I was told that, okay, if I fly to South Africa, there's a huge possibility that I will have to go into state quarantine should I arrive and I go through the fever test and they pick up a fever, which I was really prepared to do, because I think I'd rather have quarantined in my own country than quarantine somebody else somewhere else. I booked a flight on that night, literally that night, and flew, arriving in South Africa, went through the fever test. And of course, because I exhibited no outward symptoms, I kind of made it through that quarantine. And that's really the tricky part about it, is that you just don't, you can't really tell. And then immediately on arrival, went straight to my doctor. He checked basically everything that you would think would be heightened or exacerbated during a flu, and I had nothing. And so he said that then he thought I was suffering from late onset asthma, to which I replied that it just seemed extraordinary given that there was a respiratory disease going around. But still, he prescribed me with a pump and anxiety medication and gave me a script to test for COVID-19. Right, so what they do is that they take an earbud. So the test is actually just a swab. It's taking a swab of your mucus or your bodily substance. So they get what do you call it, an earbud, and they stick it in your nostril so far, the kind that, when you kind of it goes in and your eyes kind of water, and then they pull it out. So it's a very uncomfortable feeling, but it's pretty quick. It took It took no longer than 5 minutes. So results are meant to generally take 2 days, 3 days latest. That was what I was told. But in my case, it took 9 days. Yeah, 9 days from my testing date, which was actually 8 days, which was obviously very intense to be waiting during that period, and kind of it created such a panic because you start to begin to think, oh, why is it taking so long for my results? And you're going back and forth. They were communicative, Shame, and they did call me to tell me on the Thursday we're backlogged, on the Friday we are backlogged, and on the Monday we're still backlogged, which again was even more frightening to know that the numbers were all still sitting at around the 200s. The situation hadn't particularly escalated, and you're talking about not being able to get results. No, this is not a situation of no news is good news. This is a situation of no news is no news. Just stay at home until you know. My doctor is like, there is no cure and there is no vaccine for this. So essentially, you have to treat it symptom to symptom basis. So for example, if you have a fever, you take fever medication. If you have a cough, you treat that cough with cough medicine. If you a sore throat, lozenges. Everything is based symptom to symptom treatment. So yeah, I think the first symptom you kind of get, and then that symptom kind of sits for a couple of, this is how it went for me, but it's sad, like, the difficulty of breathing for about 3-4 days, and then kind of slowly creeped in the stiffness in my body for a couple of days, 2-3 days. And the dizziness was prevalent at night. But I'd say now it's about my 11th day of having had this, and it's almost as if it is a flu, like how you have a flu that usually goes over about a 14-day period, and you start off like really like tricky, and then you get worse in the middle, and then you slowly start coming back up. So I think it was just a matter of, and unfortunately I have to say, mothers being motherly, I kind of like, hello, Mom, don't come into the room, and no, let me just come, I'll put your tea here on the side table. And you just, because it's like from what I've understood and read, it can be airborne. There's surfaces that it can stick to for a certain period of time. I think the proximity of our situation just led to the fact that she has probably contracted it. So we'll be waiting for her results. They should be in the next couple of days. Take the precautionary measures, because this is really no longer just about, one person or myself as an individual. I'm healthy. The likelihood is that I will get over this and I will create antibodies and I'll be fine. But let's say I expose myself to someone who's high risk, someone with asthma, someone who's old, that becomes the issue. And we have a country of people that is just very high risk. And so, I definitely commend the president on having made swift action to go straight into the lockdown. And I think South African individuals are themselves, like now as civil society, we kind of need to help that idea by being very precautionary, washing our hands properly for 20 seconds in the kind of way that we've been taught. And also just eating healthily. I think that's one that I really wanted to ignore in the beginning, but the benefit of actual green vegetables for building my immune system, and not just post medication, not just like med lemon and all that stuff, but really just the stuff that I put into my body to help build my immune system is going to help. Dealing with something that we all don't know. There's not enough information. There's not a long enough time period to be able to project what's going to happen with this flu. So we have to act as if it's going to be the worst case scenario. You have to take care of yourself. You have to wash your hands. You have to stay away from people. You can't be out drinking. Don't even try to avoid drinking, because drinking does lower your immune system. I'm not saying give it all up, but do everything that you can to make sure that you are going to be strong enough to fight it. And if it's not enough for yourself, then you really just have to consider everybody else around you. Just do it for your mother, for your neighbors, for your grandmother, older people, for your best friend with asthma. Just think about those people. if you're carrying it and you transmit it to them, that guilt, and I think that's what will get you the most, is the guilt of knowing that you could have been responsible for spreading something that causes fatalities. And that shouldn't be an option for anyone, especially as a young person. You never really think about your the imminence of like your own death, or like, what life really means to you. And I think it's going to make us appreciate all the interactions we truly have. To not be around people just really reminds you just how much you actually like people. And I think it's going to really just remind us that as human beings, we really need to start taking care of ourselves, of the earth. And so, yeah, I think just showing love and unity, and most importantly, Ubuntu through hygiene.
For more, go to ewn.co.za.